the world's most exciting podcast, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
I'm Michael Savage, host of the Savage Nation podcast, home of borders, language, and culture. Be here or be nowhere. The Savage Nation podcast.
Catch the Michael Savage podcast on all podcast platforms every Tuesday and every Friday.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, gardeners and homesteaders, and everybody alike. Welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast. Very enthusiastic today, wouldn't you say?
Oh, sorry.
That was a good one, too.
I know.
Botanical Batavia is on the way. No, excuse me. Batavia the Botanical.
If you're going to insist on using it, get it right. I
know. I don't insist. I just do it. So, yeah, it's an amazing day. We're recording from the bunker in coastal North Carolina. We are sitting through Tropical Storm Debbie right now. So there it is. Lots of rain. But we have a good question that came up on our Facebook page, Backyard Gardens Community Garden. And it felt like it was, it's really good timing. But it's also, there's a discussion that went along with it that we just kind of wanted to break down. So there's a lot of people having this conversation, and the question, Batavia. So before we get started, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this one. Don't you?
I do. And I think that you could have this conversation at every point in the season.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, when I asked you, I saw the wheels start turning. I felt like you hit like a rusty screw or something. You break it off.
How dare you?
No, it's just like all of a sudden I just saw it click in your eyes. It was really cool to see. I was like, oh.
No, my chain slipped. That's what happened.
No, the chain slipped. Yeah. You got your pants leg stuck in the chain. Yeah. That's every kid's story.
Did I ever tell you about the time that, I'll save the story, bike accident?
Oh, yeah. No. Is it bloody?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I want to hear it.
All right. So this is almost 10 years ago when I was training for a triathlon. And I am, to be quite frank, pretty mediocre in all the sports. Right. It's so I was trying to get faster on the bike. And so I had this like nice souped up bike that had clip-in wheels or pedals or whatever. Because that's the thing that you did. You used the clip-in pedals. So anyway, I was on a training ride, and this guy was like kind of coaching or mentoring us, and he's like, all right, get on my wheel, right? And so I was like kind of speeding up, trying to catch up to him, and it was raining, and all I remember is waking up. And so I must have clipped the back of his wheel with the front of, like, my front tire clipped his back wheel. So I fell. When I came to, I had chipped my front tooth, which has been since repaired. So the blood, and cut my lip. Right, cracked open my helmet. But that's not the best part of the story. The best part of the story is I pulled my bike, got the SAG truck, and they took me back to, the parking lot and everything, went home. But I knew if I didn't get back on the bike that next day, I wouldn't get back on the bike. So
that's true.
I got my little bike back into my car, went over to Lakeshore Drive, started riding on the path. And I got down to Navy Pier. If you've ever been to Chicago, it's a big attraction. And so I was approaching a light, and the sidewalk at that point is right near traffic, car traffic. So I went to unclip, and it didn't happen. So I fell over to the side, but it was like slow motion. It was like everything you see in a television, like a cartoon or something. And then all I heard was a driver saying, "How many beers have you had?" And all I could do was lay there, clipped in, right, attached to my bike, and say, "Not too many this morning." So anywho, yeah.
That's exactly why I never use clip-in pedals. I know they make you faster. It's proven, but I never did it when I was doing triathlons. Well, yeah. And it's funny because you tell a story like that, and the Olympics are going on when we're recording this, and you hear stuff like that, and you hear about people training and how hard it is, and how much. I don't think people realize how much work actually goes into stuff like that when you're training for an event or something, or just something you want to be really good at, even like gardening. It's different. Clearly, it's different. I mean, we're not trying to run the 109.58 or anything like that, but it does take longevity and drive, which are these things that are present in an Olympic sport. And if gardening was an Olympic sport, it wouldn't be once every 4 years. It would stop for 1 year every 4 years because it'd take you that long just to kind of prove something. You know what I mean? But when we come into it kind of really does apply to this question, to this discussion a little bit. So I think we should just read the question. What do you think? Everybody who's listening, just read the question, Ben. Okay. Juliana says,
"Hey, Juliana."
I'm getting better, y'all. I gave her time. I got a little point down so she knows that it's her cue.
And it always takes me a second to not be offended, then I go in.
It's more for me than you, just so you know. It's like if I do it, then I know to give you that moment for the shout out. But Juliana wants to know when to call it. Do I have to call it? Any benefits to just letting a plant die in place? Any risks? I had a tomato plant limp along into January, but most fruit was being pecked at by birds, so I pulled it in January. And this is just the first part. So, I mean, right there, you start to see we're painting a picture. But to kind of get into the next aspect of it, I'm going to go ahead and just read Paige's. Batavia.
Oh, hey, Paige. I was reading along. I was ready to read along with you.
Yeah, I know. You weren't even looking at me. I felt offended. But she's got a good point as well. And she goes, ditto. I'm just north of Atlanta, and we had 6 weeks of super hot, no rain, followed by 2 weeks now with tons of rain. Everything feels like it has a bit of blight. But it's hard to tell. Based on my sun exposure, a fall garden is not possible. And frankly, the spring and summer has been so productive, Mama's tired. Trying to decide if I pull up the plants that look the ickiest or just let them keep meandering along until mid-October, when I'll be done for the year. I'm in raised beds and containers and a concrete pad, so I don't worry much about the soil contamination issues from leaving plants alone. Would love to know our thoughts, or young Ben and Botanical Batavia's thoughts. So,
girl, I'm tired.
There's so
too.
much there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just physical, it's the mental aspect of it too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think I've had a couple of comments on my YouTube. In the beginning of summer, I get a lot of comments about how green and lush plants look. And this isn't a brag. And I am saying, just wait. So June, July, my garden looks green and it's just leaves upon leaves upon leaves. Then once we get into August, stuff starts to struggle. And it's not in the same way that some of you all may experience with uber hot temps, but it's still strain on the garden. And I have probably about 3 or 4 spaces that over the last couple of weeks I've looked at and said, is it time? Right. And so then I start to think about how useful will this space be to me if I pull these plants. But then back to Paige's question, are they doing any harm if I leave them? Or actually, Juliana's, the top of her question, if I leave them there, is there any harm? Right. So I am quite literally bouncing this head as we record this idea through my head. And I think I know the answer. Young Ben will wait until we get to the appropriate time in the episode to tell me, to share my answer. But yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we're often thinking about in our gardens, especially later in the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I can remember earlier this year, and 2 years in a row now, I monocropped squash. And I went out there, and both years I've been like, look at this squash bed. It is amazing. And then like 3 weeks later, it's like, yeah, look at the squash bed. It's still there. And then you just pan the camera real quick, but I mean, I didn't do that, but it's like, it looks so bad and it just starts to fall apart and this, that, and the other. And so then it's like, well, what do? Do you just leave it? What is it? And, I feel like a broken record sometimes, but I'm going to keep saying it. It's all in the planning for your garden. And when I understand how things are going, I understand how certain plants grow and the life cycle of them. And if I understand that and I get it right, then I can plan for, like, I know, like, especially now that I've done, and it really kicked in when I monocropped those beds. That squash come about June is done. And so I can now really take an educated approach and plan for that bed next year appropriately, because both years I've kind of been stuck holding my hand like, well, what do I do now? And it's the same thing. Like I was just letting them die in place, just letting them go. And then it's like, well, what do we do? What's the problem? And so now that I've got it, I can take an educated approach. I can make that change and hopefully plan for something better in the future.
Yeah, so same as it relates to squash. They looked great. They were like monsters. They were taking over everything.
I saw them.
Until they weren't.
Yeah.
Right, and so I on one hand, in one of my containers, zucchini, I thought, oh, squash vine borer, looks like it's coming. And I've looked at the plants go limp every day. They bounce back. And so, how, I'll send you a picture. So squash leaves, especially for zucchini, they're big in most cases. And then you see a second flush of leaves come on, but they don't look the same. It almost looks like, a plant that's bolting, almost like the leaves are shorter or more narrow in stature. And so I said, I've seen this before. They typically don't put on a lot of new fruit after that. And so I'm like, all right, I'll put this on my list to pull. It's in a container. It's contained. And so then I saw a zucchini and I'm like, there's a tease showing me a little leg. Now it's like, and I've not gotten my fair share of squash or zucchini out of that container in my mind. I could still enjoy some, but I'm also like, I'm just watering, literally wasting water at this point. This is the tomato conversation we have every year. I'm going to get maybe two more zucchinis. I'm calling zucchini squash, just so y'all know. 2 more zucchini off of this. Is it worth my time?
Well, and I think and it's funny you said that, because I've recognized that this year too. The small leaves that come out of the main stem almost look, it does. It looks like, all the other leaves are dying. It looks like it's having rebirth. And that's not what's going on. And it's funny because what you're picking up on is that natural life cycle of that plant. And so now to recognize it. And so, as the listener can insert themselves into that. And I think that's part of the experience that comes with gardening is you start to pick. I've grown squash for years and years and years. I never really picked up on stuff, but it seems like in the past 5 or so years, I've started to notice key things about certain plants when they grow, the way the foliage looks, the way that it flowers or something, and you start to see like, like for determinants, I just pulled my tomatoes out and I was showing on the video that like the plant's growing. It does have flowers up top, but in my experience, when it starts to stretch like that, it's going to put flowers at the top, but I'm only going to get 4 tomatoes and I've got a whole bed tied up for 4 tomatoes. Yeah. That's not really worth it. Well, let me rephrase that. 4 tomatoes per plant. So you're looking at, 16 tomatoes. It's not really worth another 2 months to let those tomatoes form. So it's a hard one, but I pulled those plants out knowing that. And once I learned that, because I remember one year I had the tomatoes, I had Roma tomatoes. They got the leaf spot disease that they get every year. And I didn't know any better. So I treated and I treated and I treated and I trimmed and I treated. And I remember I got like maybe 15 Roma tomatoes after that. And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing this again. I mean, those tomatoes that were probably like 4 pounds probably cost me about $50 by the time and the amount of effort that went into it. So, when to call it is a very, it's a very subjective question. I think, you're not going to get a direct answer. You can get our opinions, but as far as letting a plant die in place, can you think of any benefits of that?
When it comes to weight loss, no two people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie, she's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary. And check out Noom's first ever cookbook, The Noom Kitchen, for 100 healthy and delicious recipes to promote better living. Available to buy now wherever books are sold.
Tuesdays at Papa Murphy's, you can get large signature or thin crust pizzas for just $12.
We call it Take and Bake Tuesday.
Talking $12 Take and Bake Tuesday?
Yeah, that's today's topic.
It's terrific for tuning up a tiring Tuesday through a tasty $12 treat.
Truthfully, Take and Bake Tuesday tops tossing back tacos.
Tell that taco to hit the trail. It's Take and Bake Tuesday's time to triumph.
Time out, this is turning into a tongue twister.
Totally tis. So just try Take and Bake for $12 every Tuesday at Papa Murphy's. Change the way you pizza.
If a plant is still producing flowers, if it's something like, if there's some other, if it's a squash plant and it's still producing flowers, like the blossoms, like that's like an expensive item to sell at the farmer's market. If you're going to use it for that, great. If you don't want to tear up the plant and then leave that soil bare, like, oh, I plan on doing something with it, like even if it's to amend it or put mulch, but I can't get to that until next week. I say leave the plant in there until next week, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, I really can't see a benefit. I think there's a part of us that believes in, similar to the top of the question, like, oh, when I left it until January, there was still fruit on it, but like, how good was that fruit? I have one more story right now. It's on my list for this week. I have 2 San Marzano plants within my garden. It's a paste type tomato, and it's the first time I've grown San Marzanos, and it's supposed to be a super popular paste tomato. And so I wanted to grow them this year, and they're in 2 separate beds, but both beds have tomato plants in them. The one that's underneath the front yard window, one of the 4 plants that are in that space, the San Marzano, has blossom end rot. The worst I've seen on a single plant in my garden. I haven't gotten in there, but it looks to be almost on every tomato that's started to produce. And so when I first saw it, I said, oh, okay. Again, it's all the same bed, and I am watering by hand. So there is a chance that I have, miswatered, water some more than others or whatever have you. Like there's some chance it could be the gardener. I grew tomatoes here last year, I tried to amend the soil. It could be any number of reasons, but to be quite frank, I'm less concerned about that. And now, and for the first time ever, I'm looking at this to say it's a determinate variety. This fruit I have is going to be the fruit that it produces. Maybe I give the rest of these tomato plants a better chance. Let's take out this one. And I haven't made the decision yet, but that's where I'm leaning, and give these other plants an opportunity to stretch out.
Yeah. Okay. You said San Marzano, and I got hung up on the name. I've never grown them. Dish it. What's the dish? What's the scoop?
Well, I haven't made anything with them yet.
I don't care about the taste. Production wise, compared to aroma.
Aroma's ahead.
Okay. Disease resistance, we're not really sure about.
San Marzanos, Romas are more bush-like, more controlled. San Marzonos get a little bit more flappy as far as the stems and the leaves.
So you said San Marzonos are more bush-like?
No, Romas are more bush-like.
You meant Roma?
Yeah. That's
okay, so man,
which
we're
is
about
a
to get
positive
off.
for me. I'd rather a more compact plant.
So we're about to get off subject a little bit, but I don't care. My ace bush tomatoes. What in the hell is going on in the world? I mean, when they say bush, it was like, okay, like it was bad. So this is something that I have to like think about in the future, which I've never really had to think about, is like the growth pattern of the tomato, right? And this actually, it does lead back into it because they got so big that they were choking each other out. And so I was like, well, what do I do? Well, I had to put up a 4-weave because I couldn't afford to buy any more tomato cages. Yeah, y'all think we make millions of dollars. I couldn't even buy no damn tomato cages. That's how bad it is. So I did a Florida weave and it collapsed. But then I decided to leave it because it was giving the damn bed some space because they were getting so big. So the San Marzonos are not as bushy.
They're not as bushy from what I can tell. They're planted right next to each other.
The Romas and the San Marzonos?
Intentionally.
Okay, so I won't be getting any seeds that you saved from those. Okay, check. I'm not joking.
I do have some San Marzono seeds I can send to you, though. And these fruit size Romas have been larger than even San Marzonos I've seen at the farmer's market, like as a baseline. Those are smaller actual tomatoes, but the idea is it doesn't matter because it's such a better tomato. I don't know pound for pound, and that was a part of my hope, that pound for pound I could track that, but that's gone out of the window too.
Yeah, I'm just curious because you go to the store and you buy a can of Roma tomatoes, and I don't know, they're $1. You buy San Marzonos and they're $1.50. I'm like, what the hell's the difference? And then I know that a lot of people grow San Marzonos. I've never done it. I just am partial to my Roma tomatoes, which I didn't grow this year. When am I going to learn my lesson? But I let them go, and they, I had one plant in there that I never really showed because it never really showed itself. On the Sandy Bottom Homestead on YouTube, check it out. It was dwarfed and it never really did anything. And I thought to myself, I would walk by it and I would say, should I pull this plant? Should I not pull this plant? It's not producing. It's noticeably smaller. And so I thought, well, maybe it's a disease. And then I said, well, no, I don't think it's a disease. And I think it was just bad genetics in the seed is what I think it came down to. So I ended up leaving it. But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, if I would have pulled it, what would have been the benefit? Right. And so the benefit, I can give you one big benefit is it would create space within that garden. So when that bed was feeling cramped, if I would have removed that, it would have let my green beans get more light, my black-eyed peas get more light, and the other tomatoes around it get more light, and it wouldn't cause it to fight for nutrients. So there's all of that right there, just right off the bat. So, but I never did pull it until the end. I let it because I wanted to see what it would do. And so moving forward, I look at it, and it's one of those moments where you look back and you're like, I should have pulled that damn plant.
But you know what? You just tapped into something. So all of the reasons you described are a good reason to say if this one plant even produces, a fourth of the tomatoes that you'd expect it to produce, it's still not worth it in my book. So that's a footnote. But also, I have about 10 tomato plants in my garden, various varieties. And it's easy for me to say, all right, I got a whole other San Marzono plant planted. Like, I'm looking at it through that lens. If I had 2 tomato plants or 1, my attitude would be different. My attitude has been different, right?
Well, and that's we've often said on here, or I know I have. I don't know if you actually agree with this or not, but that's why a bigger garden is better, I think. And when I say bigger, I don't mean you have to have an acre or anything like that. But, being able to plant more of something is a lot better than like I have 1 tomato plant. Because you've got it all in there, and then if that tomato plant dies, what it's going to lead us to do is make bad decisions. Because no matter what you're growing, you always want to get a harvest off of it. But if you don't have the options to take it out, then you definitely have, you're going to lean into making a bad decision as far as like leaving it in there, because, and I mean, the elephant in the room, let's just get it out in the air. If it's got a disease, it's going to spread and it's going to get in your soil and it's going to last. You know, I'm dealing with that now with my green beans from last year. They had mosaic virus. I put cucumbers in there this year and they got it. So I went ahead, I pulled the cucumbers out, and then I took the trellis out of that garden completely. It's gone. It is not there, and it won't be there for a number of years, if not ever come back. I may move it somewhere else. But, you know, it's just one of those things that you look at and you're like, okay, well, this is an issue, you know. How do we fix this? What can we do different in the future? And that's really important to kind of to think about, because you can't just look at the here and now. You got to look at it in the future too. And when we get to the second part of the original question is, I had a tomato plant limp along into January, but most of the fruit was pecked at by birds, so I pulled it in January. What could you have put in its place that would have given you a harvest that, one, the birds don't care about, two, wouldn't have the birds, which will be the pests for this conversation, continue to come back to your garden and they can move on somewhere else and find food in another place and not establish a presence in your garden.
Yeah, and clearly if a tomato plant's surviving in her space and up and through January and she just pulled it, it wasn't like the weather killed it. You have a few different options about what you can grow and plant. I do want to go back to is there a reason? Like, if there's something you feel like you can learn from kind of watching this plant go through these motions, then I get that, right? You know, so if it was a healthy plant, would she have been getting like great fruit from it in December and January? I don't know, right? But
we wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, right. So, like, could she walk away and say, well, she knows that at least a plant will live for sure through up into January in her environment. So maybe that's a lesson, that's worth pulling it in, January versus December. I didn't see where she actually lived, like what state, or if she's in the U.S. Maybe she's not in the U.S., a different place. January could mean something different for her than it does for us. But I think, if you're looking at this with clear eyes, when did you plan on pulling your tomato plants out? Like, when did you expect to have, like, what did your garden plan have? And I'm being a little bit cynical because you know how many years I gardened without a garden plan up until like last year, like,
bro,
so don't think that I'm doing a tisk here.
I mean, that's the biggest thing that we say is like having a plan. But I agree with what you said. Is there a benefit to sitting back and watching it go through that? I absolutely think there is, because now Juliana knows that, like, hey, it may not be worth it for me to let a tomato plant go that long. And I think that's, we talk about
that's valuable.
It's very valuable. And that's part of the educational experience, because you and I can sit here until we're blue in the face and tell everybody how, we can tell the listeners how the plants grow and what to expect. But bottom line is, everybody's climate's different and it's all going to grow differently in your areas. And sometimes I think the natural progression of a gardener is to do things like this. And it's up to us to either be astute and take note. And when I say take notes, I don't mean sit out there with a notepad, but, take a mental note and say, like, hey, that really wasn't worth the time. Like last year, I did that second planting of tomatoes and they did great. The problem was all my tomatoes were coming on right at the end of the season. So as it was cooling, they were just dropping.
Yeah.
So I ended up with probably almost 50 pounds of green Roma tomatoes. So I took that into account, and you don't see me doing a second planting this year, but next year, what you'll see is me adjusting my plan in order to be able to do that and have a second planting of tomatoes in the ground at the right time. So, instead of putting them in when I harvest them or pull up my other tomatoes, I'll put these in 2 months before, and then I'll be able to have my tomatoes go until the rest of the year. And I'm still not even convinced, because of the disease issues that come I mean, like this week, for instance, we're going to get a foot of rain in 3 days. It's going to be really hard for a tomato plant to survive that. But at the same time, like, whatever, I'm going to give it a shot. You know what I mean? I got to learn. And that's how you learn. And that's how, one of the things that I like to do in the garden is I like to try and break the rules. And I don't really think I'm breaking the rules. I think it's just working within the plant's ability to grow in the time span and taking full advantage of the growing season that you have. And so that's one of the things that I think, I am consistently trying to do. I don't know about other people, but that's my goal, is to kind of do that. So, and planning is very important, which is why we recommend the Planters app. We use a Planters app for this. Batavia, she's apparently had this ingenious way of using it this year, of having multiple garden seasons all in one drag and drop interface. So with the square foot and everything it's got in it, it's really good. All the different, and it's funny, we were talking about San Marzanos earlier, and I was looking in the Planter app and reading on there about the San Marzanos, and I was trying to compare between that and the Romas. So it's where I was doing my initial research. So it's been really helpful for that. Check out the link below to get yourself a discount on the Planter app. It's a supporter of the show and a sponsor, and we love having it for a specific reason, because it is really amazing. And when you start talking about this, because as we get into the second part of this, where Mama's tired, which I feel you, that garden plan can really kick in at that point. And even though you may be letting stuff sit until October, what else can you get in that space? And having that visual garden plan is really going to help you. So check out the Planter app. It's available on your Google and Apple Play stores, and you can use it on your phone, PC, or the tablet.
I've said this before about the Planter app, and when I close out 2024's garden season, will have been updated. I just do a copy of it to keep kind of what my intention was, and then I make a copy of it. It'll be updated with what ended up happening in the garden. And so I feel like I won't ever forget that in my 10-foot space, 5 tomato plants is too many. My neighbor's landscaper told me that earlier in the season. And now, more specifically, a 10-foot space that's 3.5 feet wide that also has pepper plants and has some onions in it. Too much, right? So I'm able to acknowledge that this is what was growing in there. So I've loaded that in, and I've added a note to myself, right? Because I will in 6 months misremember this. I will think it was, only the onions' fault, right? Like I broke the top off. I topped off a green bell pepper plant accidentally because I was trying to reach in to get some ripe tomatoes, right? And so one could argue I could be posed with is it worth letting these pepper plants continue to grow, or do I forfeit them and focus on the tomatoes that are there? Like, what's the kind of cash crop from this? I mentioned this earlier, and it's over on Be Better Garden as well. We talk about how I overcrowded this bed in the worst way. And I'm looking at it now and saying, like, I am putting work into trying to keep these things upright, quite literally. So again, it's a lesson I learned. I actually had plans on duplicating this setup in the bed across from it next year. And I've learned so much in just over 2 months of growing in this particular bed. I won't do the same thing. And I'm going to have some notes in the Planter app that remind me not to.
Well, and the thing is, and, this all applies to this question. But when it comes in, I'm just going to tell you right now, real moment, we need to do an episode about spacing. Because the Planter app tells you how to space. Yeah. And I didn't space right either. I've been gardening for, I don't know, man, how long I've been gardening for. 18 years now, almost, I think. It's disgusting. And I still get my spacing wrong. So that's something that I want to focus on for the next year. And you're right. And the thing is, and again, when we come back to this, pulling that plant out that's dying in place can definitely help with your spacing just naturally. We can let that be a lesson to ourselves, because I've done stuff like this where I've pulled a plant out to create space, and then guess what? Voila. All of a sudden, the plant is doing amazing. the one that I left or something like that. So those are all parts of it. But let's get into Paige's part of it too, where she's, she had 6 weeks super dry, hot, no rain. I feel you. And now we're just getting tons of rain. But it's the South. We may not get any more rain after this. We don't know. But she says based on sun exposure, a fall garden is not possible. But at the same time, we know that she lets plants meander in the garden until mid-October. So let's put it to you this way. Fall plants don't need as much sun as a summer plant, right? Like lettuce, for example, can get away with 4 hours of sunlight. I think spinach the same. So there are plants that can produce in less sunlight. So if we think about that and we say, hey, I get that you're tired. And tired doesn't just mean physically either. It's mentally. It's the treating for the pests. It's the harvesting. It's the, oh my gosh, what's wrong with my plant? What am I going to do? It's the weeding. It's the mulching, the watering, like all of these things. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, when it gets down to it, what can we get to grow in that space in the time frame? I think that's an important question, because if we plant something at the right time, I think it's going to be easier on us than at the wrong time.
Yeah, I think that there's something about like copy and paste of the, I am, Paige, listen to me when I say every year, just like Ben can predict when his tomatoes are going to get sick, when his plants are going to get sick, I can predict where I am going to be dragging myself outside to the garden. I'm going to be tired. I'm about 2 weeks early of being tired, on my tired train this year. That's, life, right? And so there is something refreshing about a new veggie, a veggie that you haven't had either this garden season or since the spring, a veggie that doesn't require as much of you as some of the things that, we may have let, sit around our garden, during this summer. There's something to be said about that. And there's something to be said about growing just a couple of things where, we may be looking at fall garden too broadly and making it too big. And I'm also okay with this, your summer plants. The rest of them have kicked butt so much. Someone commented recently, I don't think it was Paige, I'll have to go back and check now, about how they don't normally plant a fall garden, specifically because, now I'm thinking maybe it is Paige, because they don't plant a fall garden because their summer plants do so well as we kind of get into this stretch of get something in for fall. They're doing still so well. And I get that. But that's not all of our story when it comes to as, we get from July to August to September. Like a lot of things are limping along, similar to Juliana's tomato plant in January.
Well, I remember, for a bunch of years, I would just, again, let the tomato grow, let the squash stay in. And once I started pulling that stuff out and I was like, okay, I got an empty bed. I got like 2 months left until my first frost. And that was just with me really starting to think like, yeah, the first frost comes and I know some things will really go past the first frost to an extent, but I didn't realize how far past it would go. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I started playing with like, let me put this in, let me put lettuce, let me put a cabbage, this, that, and the other in, and how easy it was. Let me take one step back. Once it got settled, how easy it was to grow. And there's a period when your garden's growing. Let me know if you've experienced this, Batavia, where it seems like it's on cruise control. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You're not harvesting. Mm-hmm. You're just basically managing everything. You're checking for pests every once in a while. Everything, like the pests aren't really bad. The water's coming in, and it's like the honeymoon phase of that season. And what I found is, as we got later into the season, I was having that honeymoon phase once again, which meant I could be kind of hands off on my garden, which is really where I'm at now. I'm kind of hands off at the moment. There's not a whole lot going on in my garden because I'm in the process of transitioning over. We're in a transition period. So I've got a couple empty beds. I've got some seeds germinating. I've got some plants finishing up, and going in. And I do want to touch on her being tired as well. I plant a whole bed of sweet potatoes for a reason, because I don't really have to do anything with them. That's a whole bed that just grows. And I don't have to do much with it at all until it's time to harvest it. And then the work kicks in, but that's the fun part, right? So there, you manage that with the amount you grow, and what you grow will help you with that fatigue that sets in. Because truth moment, when we grow food, like when we go to the store and it's so easy to buy a vegetable, but when you grow it, you start to learn how much work goes behind growing that vegetable. It's really eye-opening to me what effort goes in to doing, to taking care of a plant. And I understand that we're doing it on a micro scale compared to a big farm. If a big farm had a whole row of tomatoes die, they don't care. Mm-hmm. They've got, 200, 300, 400 other rows to go by. But for us, it's a big deal. So it is it's a different scale, but planting in the right season and in the right time, and frankly, knowing when things are in the ground and are struggling, I'm a big proponent of get them the hell out of there and get something in its place that's really going to make a difference and make it easier on you. And there's all kinds of ways to do it. You can start the seeds, which definitely does add a bit of stress and work. Or you could buy a transplant and pop it in. You know what I mean?
Tuesdays at Papa Murphy's, you can get large signature or thin crust pizzas for just $12.
We call it Take and Bake Tuesday.
Talking $12 Take and Bake Tuesday?
Yeah, that's today's topic.
It's terrific for tuning up a tiring Tuesday through a tasty $12 treat.
Truthfully, Take and Bake Tuesday tops tossing back tacos.
Tell that taco to hit the trail. It's Take and Bake Tuesday's time to triumph.
Time out, this is turning into a tongue twister.
Totally tis. So just try Take and Bake for $12 every Tuesday at Papa Murphy's. Change the way you pizza.
Yeah, we had talked about on a recent episode, I think it was a regular episode, about what I was going to plant for fall cabbage. And I was out this morning and I found a cabbage moth under my cover in a little 3.5 by 3.5 foot bed where I had 3 cabbage planted earlier in the summer, maybe late spring. And I was counting on them taking me through fall. I'd have at least 3 heads of cabbage, and I'm getting a closer look at them and I'm like, I don't know. Right. And I have a good kale plant in there and I'm just like, this is next to the squash that looked wonderful. Right. But no longer does. And I'm like, I could get a whole half a bed back, more than a half a bed back, and so it doesn't make me feel great. No. Will this, cabbage recover? Maybe. But it's one of those things like what you put a plant in your garden that knew that was unhealthy. Yeah. You wouldn't. Most people wouldn't.
Last year when I pulled my tomato plants out that I had done my second crop from, mm-hmm. I looked at that bed and I thought to myself, I had 4 tomato plants that made it through. And then I had a row in the front that was empty. And I looked at it and I said, all right, I'm getting nothing but green tomatoes right now. Mm-hmm. What could I have put into this other place? And then it really kicked in as I was planting. I could have put 32 cabbages in there. 32 cabbages at $5 a piece at the store. That's what I could have put in there. But I didn't, because I wanted to try and let those tomatoes go as long as they possibly could. Mm-hmm. And the first frost came and I was covering them, trying everything I could, doing exactly what, but I wanted to see what could happen. But that was eye-opening for me when I started looking at the numbers, and I was like, man, that is so much space that could have been freed up for me to use at a later date. It was a very eye-opening experience.
Or so much space that you don't have a plant kind of robbing the soil from that nutrients. And I used a little bit, extreme with the robbing of the soil, right? When it's not for you, what is it? It's against you. And so I think that for me, the space that is going to be ready to use earlier than I anticipated, I expected to get more out. I expected that 3.5 by 3.5 foot space to take me through winter, or not winter, maybe through fall. I wasn't going to plant it in again this year, but now I'm looking at it and saying, I'm also looking at it and saying it's on the other side of the trellis, which is going to have even more limited light. Now I need to come up with a game plan potentially on what's going to grow there. It could be a space where I'm sowing my spinach for the fall. There are a bunch of different options. I think it is when you are faced with should I pull it? Do I have to call time on it? And you don't have a backup plan. I think it makes it easier for you to keep that plan in place.
Yeah.
Like you're still growing something. And I think I'm super happy that it was a tomato plant as the example, because it's kind of the poster child of the good and the bad and sometimes the ugly. But this could be any number of plants that we're talking about, and tomatoes are interesting because if it was an indeterminate and where Juliana is, like it could be producing, continuing through. It sounds like Leonard has dug up that our caller is from California.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's, it's interesting to think about, and you get into different varieties and then it's like, yeah, we start talking about varieties and you start talking about different places and you can really kind of change the game completely there. I've stated many times, and it's well known in the South, you don't really grow indeterminate tomatoes successfully. It's really hard to do so. So we mostly focus on determinants. And that changed the game for me, once I learned that aspect of it. But, leaving your plants in the garden, just letting them die out, it's not, the other thing too is if it's got a pest on it, it's going to take hold. And what it does is it overwinters in the soil. It's kind of, especially when you live in somewhere northern, and you're like, well, where do the Japanese beetles come every year? How do they get here? And, it's not like they fly in. They live in your soil all winter, and then they hatch out and they come out. So, it's like eliminating space for that. And I know that there's soil all over the place. It's not just in your garden. Right next to it is bare soil with grass growing or whatever, and stuff can live in there. But if we eliminate it to some extent, it's not as bad. You know what I mean? It's like you're helping the numbers come down in that general area. Mm-hmm. You're not going to if every gardener in the country was like, we're going to pull all of our, we're not going to grow any cabbage this year, so there's no cabbage moth. There's still going to be a cabbage moth. You're not going to get rid of it, but the thing is you're not allowing it to take hold, because what we're doing is we have every single person listening to this has created a micro ecosystem within their yard. You have created a system. If you go out there, you will see the circle of life occurring, and the animals and creatures that come into your garden. It doesn't matter where you are. You've got it. I've got extra lizards that hang out there to eat the pests. I've got, different wasps that come in and do, I've got all kinds of stuff out there that most people don't have when they just have grass. Mm-hmm. They don't see that stuff, but we have created this place where we create shelter, food, and water for them, and we've created this micro ecosystem, which I'm sure there's a better name for it, but that's the name that I'm going to give it for today. So, thinking about that, leaving it in place is not a good thing. It's hard to do. It's hard to see a plant, and we just want to save it. But at the same time, we can't. You know what I mean?
The place that I'm in now as a gardener, I'd say, even being in the glorious California where you can still grow tomatoes in January, that is not me being like a little bit salty, Juliana. That is not. And what I just said is not the truth, because I'm absolutely salty about that. But right now, sitting in the chair I'm sitting, I would pull the plant. I would have pulled it earlier on. Yeah. But a year ago, I don't even know if a year ago if I would have, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I think, if I'm really honest, I'm not sure about my answer in May to this question. Because there's a certain level of hopefulness that I have coming into the garden season.
Absolutely.
Right? Versus you think you're more informed because you've watched this plant grow over the year, of the garden year, and you have more information about it. And if it's in my garden, I probably would be able to make the decision easily, no matter when to pull it. But if I'm giving an opinion about someone else's, it's like, oh, there's this level of wait and see, and like so many things, plants are stronger than we think they are. And in August, I'm kind of like, girl, listen, one less thing for you to worry about. How about that? Give yourself a little bit more peace in your garden.
Yeah, I got one of my son's friends was at the front door just constantly ringing the bell. I'm telling my wife to like talk to him through the doorbell and be like, leave. Yeah, that whole in May thing is really hard too. I'm thankful actually that we're doing this time of year and not in May, because I think we'd be having a harder conversation. My answer is still my answer, but I still think that it would be much more difficult, and it's harder to convince somebody. And I've had to do it, and especially you talk about May, but we've been raising some of these plants since February, so you've already got 3 months in the game, and then you've got like, oh, okay, well now it's sick. What do I do? But at the same time, I don't know. Okay, so I've got a Seminole pumpkin. He grew out of my compost pile. And this has become a tradition, as most people's, it's not just mine, where something grows out of your compost pile and you just kind of let it grow, right? Well, the plant, during the drought, I mean, it looked rough. It was every day, it was wilting. It didn't get watered I've never watered it myself. I just let, if it's going to live, it's going to live. It took over my pepper bed and basically killed my pepper bed. But I'm at the point, where I probably should have gotten rid of it, but I'm like, well, I don't know. But it was looking so rough for so long. But I had determined that I went out there and I really looked at it one day, and I looked over every leaf for like all 20 feet of the vine. And I said, well, I don't see any pests. I don't, and so I concluded that it was just water. And I did think to myself, like, maybe it'll just die and go away. Maybe I just won't even have to worry about it. And then we started getting rain, and now it's like I can't even see the bed anymore. The pepper, the pumpkin's there. So that's like a whole different side of it, though. It's not even sick, but it's just doing too much. You know what I mean? It's too active. It's taking too much space.
Yeah.
And so that's a hard one.
The place I come from, and maybe it's not even May, maybe it's more like April. It's the dance I do with volunteers every year.
Yeah.
It's that hopefulness. This is not a part of your plan. I look at it as a blessing, and I kind of want to let it like live out its life, but it's an interruption, know? And so again, that same spirit is the spirit where I question how easy it would be to give the answer if we're in spring and not kind of rounding third for summer heading into fall. Right. So if you go back to the question, well, what would you put in its place if you pulled it? Right,
Yeah. And so the thing is if I was going to pull that, I would have pulled it in June. So it was like, well, what would I do at that time? You know what I mean? Now, granted, It was coming out. It was June when I was looking to pull it, but it was late June. But the benefit of it was coming out of the compost pile, so there really wasn't anything else I could plant. But say it was in the garden, well, then what do I do? You know what I mean? Because we're always fighting the clock. That's just all there is to it. So, and then the last part of this is about contaminated soil. She says, I have raised beds on a concrete pad, so I don't worry much about the soil contamination issues. I'm assuming that means if there's a disease in the plant. Not like some kind of toxin or something like that, like outside.
When I think contaminated soil, I think toxins, some type of outside influence. But I too read it as I'm not worried about contaminating the soil because I'm sitting on top of this concrete. But there's still soil around that plant that's on that concrete pad.
I would absolutely worried about contaminating the soil.
If we're reading it in the same way where that plant will do harm if you leave it in, if it's not healthy.
Yep. And I would actually argue because it's a raised bed on a concrete pad is basically a big container. I would imagine that could actually be magnified because of that. That's my personal opinion. What do you think? You have that, so.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Magnified, meaning...
Well, because there's nowhere for the soil to go. It's on an impervious surface, so the nutrients, the water, the disease, whatever can't drain down into the earth. It kind of just stays right there. That's where I sit with that.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, I get it.
Do you
look
think
at it
so?
like whatever disease or toxin in the worst version of contaminated soil, it basically is like entrenching itself into the soil if it's not sitting on the concrete pad. So I kind of look at it as the opposite. And we're going a little bit further off, if you had an issue with soil contamination, if you needed to replace it, you have a better chance at really truly replacing it if it's sitting on that concrete pad. But we're not here to debate if one is better or the worse. I don't believe leaving sick plants, which wasn't exactly the way that Juliana described it. I know that Paige mentioned contamination issues, but I don't believe leaving sick plants in your garden is ever a good idea.
Yeah.
Hard stop. Again.
Yeah.
We're not accusing either of you of that, but I think for this episode, it's worth stating.
Yeah, if you have a sick plant, pull the roots up and everything. Get the whole thing out of there. And don't put it in your compost. Don't feed it to your chickens. Just get it out of there, move it along. And I mean, if you have a sick plant, disease, something like that, just do it. I mean, look, we've talked about it on this episode. Both Batavia and I have done the opposite, and we are suffering the consequences. So now let me tell you this. It took me 18 years to get to the point to where I had that issue come back another year. So it's not super common, but when it does happen, it happens, and it's upsetting. So there you go. I think that basically does it. Before we move on to the question that I know we went a little bit long, remove or leave?
Remove.
Batavia, okay, can I finish? If it's like not doing well, as in not producing or anything like that.
When she said limp along to January.
Remove or leave?
Remove.
Me too. Remove. I remove too. Now, what about if you don't have any plans, like even if you don't have plans to put anything in there, remove or leave?
What you should do is remove. What I may do is probably leave.
Yeah.
What she may end up getting is some volunteer tomatoes as the birds are pecking at them.
Yeah. So I remove and then just mulch. And I think of it as I'm redoing the soil for next year.
Preparing for your next planting. Yep.
So before we move on to the question of the day, I do want everybody to know you can buy seeds from us. Check out the link below. We've got all our seeds in the store. I got to pack an order right now and ship it. So go ahead. Buy some seeds from us. It's an amazing experience buying a backyard garden seeds. You can't get anything better than seeds from the Backyard Gardens podcast, can you? We have picked these varieties based on what Batavia and I have grown in our gardens. So these are the varieties that we like to grow. So come check them out. The more you buy, the more we expand. So we will be getting tomatoes and stuff soon-ish. So just hang tight, but we will be getting them, and they will be up for next season in time for you to get them, because you know how we are. We like to buy our seeds early, so we'll get them up for you in the time that we would normally buy them, so don't worry. They'll be there. So link is below. All right, Sue has a pretty good question. When growing peas, in regards to the type, snap, snow, or shelling, are there types that grow better in either fall or spring? Or can any type be grown in any season? Either season.
Excellent question. Hey, Sue. I told Paige I was tired. I'm tired, Sue. I'm sorry, girl.
There's a lot of haze in this one, so a lot of shout outs. What do you think?
Peas, I think green peas, spring probably is better than fall. I'm going to try to grow them this fall. Shelling peas, I default to spring because they take a longer period of time to grow. So you're going to go from spring into summer with those versus fall into winter. And then green beans, late spring.
No, snap, snow, or shelling.
Oh, snap, snow. Snap, snow, or shelling.
Are snap and shelling not the same ones?
Snap, I thought were green beans.
I don't know. Let me ask the doctor while you think about it.
So snow and because shelling beans is what I'm thinking about. If it's shelling peas, it's your sweet green pea.
Snap peas there is a snap peas, sugar daddy, sugar snaps.
Yeah, you can
those
shell
are the ones that popped
you're
up.
shelling. Oh yeah, shelling the green pea. Good grief! Spring is my answer. Shit.
Well, what is this? Okay, I think, no, not saying anything against what Sue has asked. I've always been confused about the difference between a snap and a shelling pea. And it looks to me, and I could be totally off base here, but it looks to me as it's just like a intricacy of the name. Mm-hmm. Like some people, tomato. Mm-hmm. So, here it goes. What's the difference? Sugar snap peas, simply called snap peas, are a cross between shelling, English peas, and snow peas. As with shelling peas, the seeds are allowed to plump up a bit. However, the pods are crisp and edible. Okay, so shelling peas the pods are edible, and snap peas, I imagine they're not. Snow peas are definitely edible. That's the way you consume them. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So here's my take on all plants that grow. If it doesn't have to grow a pea to size, it's going to be faster to get to harvest. And so in the fall, I would do snow peas. In the spring, I would do snap or shelling peas. I'm really glad we had this question because I have been trying to grow green peas and haven't been very successful. Maybe I just don't know what I'm buying. I need to now take my new definition of shelling peas and go from there. Because I think I've been a little bit confused. So I think this question is actually one of my favorites because it made me figure out like what the hell I'm doing. I think in the fall I would just stick to something that grows quick, but that also depends on your weather too. If you have a long, cool fall or warm fall, warmer than cold, whatever, you know what I mean? You could get away with either one, I think.
Spring.
For what?
All of them. I'm thoroughly confused.
For you?
Yeah, I'm looking at this to say if you need to pull the pea out of the pod.
Yeah.
I'm looking at all of these and saying they prefer cooler weather. So that's my starting point. And I believe that you may have better control coming out of winter going into spring, planting them in the spring, and then getting the harvest right at the start of summer. Now, again, that's probably a northerner's perspective as well.
I don't think so. I think that's the common sense because there's more time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You've got more flexibility. That's the word. Yeah. Flexibility.
Yeah, but it'd be exactly like for me, spring going into summer, because my summers are mild at the beginning, may work better for peas for me of any of these sorts. Whereas I'm going into brick cold weather in the fall, and so it doesn't work out as well for me. But for you, you're going from, winter to spring to, hella hot, right? So you may not have enough cool weather in the spring. So fall may work out better for you because it's more like fall going into winter for those to produce.
Yeah, did Sue say where she was? I don't remember. Do you remember?
No, but I give Sue the prize for thoroughly confusing me in the best way. I often don't walk away from the episode and then look up stuff, but I'm looking up stuff, Sue. You got me looking it up.
No, and I mean it's a good thing because I had always assumed, I don't know what I assumed to be honest, between snap and shelling. I guess I thought they were the same, but clearly there's different intentions with them, which makes sense because I grew a pea last year. Now I don't even know what to call it, so we'll put it there. But I grew a pea, and I was like, man, this thing looks good. I took a bite out of the pot. I grew two kinds. One tasted fine with a pea in it, and then the other one didn't. And then I go to a party, which, I get invited to parties every once in a while. Give me a break. Well, now I had my smoking jacket on and everything. And they had the peas with the pod, and I was like, I'm not eating that. That thing's going to taste like crap, But now I guess there's a difference, so there you go. But yeah, just stick to, you have a hard stop in your climate. Mm-hmm. I have a more forgiving winter climate, so there is that. But I would do snow peas in the winter, and then all of the above in the spring. Mm-hmm. And I think spring is the easiest time to grow peas, personally.
And the snow peas were because you don't have to go to that second layer of growing. You can quite literally, you're harvesting them for the pod. That's the reason why you said snow peas in the winter, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You don't need as long of a time on the clock because of how little they have to produce compared to the others. All right, I'm with you.
Good?
Good.
Well, if you'd like to be like Sue
and thoroughly confuse Batavia
and Ben, which please do. We love researching stuff. You can do so by emailing us at bygquestion@gmail.com, or you can go to Facebook at Backyard Gardens Community Garden and leave something there. If you do it there, please put question of the day so we know to find it. But we do put up posts every once in a while asking for them, so feel free to do so. And Batavia the Botanical has her hand in the air. Yes, ma'am.
Just because I'm a bit spicy around this. Sue, I do thank you for this question because I think, like young Ben, I may have struggled with this, and I may be growing the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong season. So me not knowing for sure is telling me that I need to read up on it a little bit more and maybe make a better plan for these, because I love the snow, the snap. Well, I really, really love the snap and the shelling. The snow I can deal with.
I love snow, and I want to love snap or shelling, whatever. Can I say something before we go?
Yeah, of course.
You said I can be a bit, and I thought you were going to add something on the end, and I was like, don't say that about yourself,
No.
Batavia. I was like, what is wrong with her?
I haven't been that since my early 20s.
I was going to say, I don't get that from you at all. But everybody, thank you for listening. Check out our seeds in the store below. Become a subscriber. Get yourself the planter app. Use the link below. All that good stuff. Have a good day. Continue to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens Community Garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia is at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.